and welcome to Treasure Expeditions. I'm your host, Terry Saunders. On this episode of Treasure Expeditions, I speak to Rich Hyatt. Rich spent 15 years in the Army and battled blazes.
Spent 15 years in the Army total between active duty and then National Guard and Army Reserve and that kind of thing. I joined the Army when I was about 19 to get some money for college. They used to have a program where you could join the Army and then they'd pay your way through college, essentially. And so that was very attractive to me. So I did it just for the college money, and then found that I liked it and I was kind of good at it. So I did some stuff there for a while.
Rich describes his job in the Army.
Initially, I was involved in what they call short-range air defense artillery. That was a job that was kind of being phased out, so there wasn't really a lot of exciting things happening there. And then while I was doing that, I discovered that infantry stuff was actually enjoyable to me. I kind of had a knack for it, and I had the opportunity to get that job, so cross-trained to it, and so I did that. And so I did that for several years, and then came out into the National Guard and became a flight medic in what they call a dust-off unit, which is they fly in helicopters and they pull people off the battlefield who are wounded and injured. And then in the civilian world, we used to go out into the Sierra Nevada mountains and we'd rescue hikers and climbers and skiers that got hurt up there. And I did that for about 9 years.
Rich describes the Sierra Nevadas.
Much like the Rockies, just on a smaller scale. That's my dog saying hello. He's wondering why he's not in here. It was beautiful. I mean, there's places out there that are absolutely gorgeous, just like here in Colorado. The difference, I think, is that the Rockies are a much higher mountain range. So you don't get the big jagged peaks like you do out here. A few, but it was beautiful. I enjoyed flying around in a helicopter all up the valleys and around the peaks and looking for lost climbers and hikers and things. So I enjoyed it.
Rich talks about another rescue location.
How about this one might be more appropriate for climbing and hiking in Colorado, anything you're doing in the mountains. So in California, where I live in Northern California, there is a place called Mount Shasta, and it's about 14,400 feet. I don't know, you may be familiar with Mount Shasta, but it takes off from the valley floor. So the valley floor is maybe right around sea level, and it goes straight to 14,400. And in the summertime, people will have a tendency to want to climb the mountain, and it's a fairly easy climb. I mean, it's not technical at all. So people tend to go up there wearing sandals and shorts and t-shirts and not be prepared for what happens at 14,000 feet. And what would happen a lot of times is they get up there and all of a sudden we get some weather that would come in, and now it's 20 degrees. It might be 100 degrees on the valley floor, but now it's 15 or 20 degrees up at the peak. They might roll an ankle, or they might just succumb to the weather and not be able to get down off the mountain. So one thing that we did several times was we would fly to the peak of Mount Shasta in the helicopter and pull these people off and get them to safety. And so sometimes I'll tell people I've been to the top of Mount Shasta probably 10 times, but I've never actually climbed the mountain. So I've always gotten there by helicopter, to pull these people off. So I guess the lesson there is obviously, don't prepare for what you're experiencing right now. Prepare for what you're going to experience when you get to your destination, as far as altitude, elevation, and weather.
Rich shares more safety tips for hiking.
I would suggest, in addition to being prepared for what you could come across at your destination, I would suggest that it's a really good idea to let people know where you're going and when to expect you back. Say, I'll be going to Mount Shasta and I'm going to be back on Wednesday. Well, if I'm not home on Wednesday morning, I would hope somebody start making some phone calls. But if I haven't told anybody, then I'm stuck, So good idea to let people know where you're going, when you're coming back. And I know that there are now items out there that you can buy that will send a distress signal. If you get into something and you're in a jam and you can't get out of, you can press a button on this GPS or satellite driven device, and it'll send a message. It'll make phone calls, it'll text, it'll send messages to the people you select to let them know that you're in trouble, and then they can get the rescue moving.
Rich talks about nature.
I think it puts things in perspective for us, we have our life that we live every day, down here where you can go to the store and get something to eat, or if you twist your ankle, you can sit down and take it easy or whatever. You get out into nature, at least when you get deep into nature, nature doesn't care. You're this big out there. So if you roll your ankle, you're done. Or if you have an emergency, or if you get lost, I guess what I'm saying is that it puts things into perspective for me, in that I am just a small little part of this whole thing. The things that bother me when I'm down here worrying about whether the lawn got mowed or whatever, they really don't mean much when you get out into the woods. And nature, you got to be prepared, you got to have yourself together, and you got to make smart decisions, because the price for a dumb decision, could be your life out there. And nature does not care. The animals will come and eat what's left, and the cycle of life continues, and everybody wonders, hey, what happened to that guy? Well, he went out unprepared. So, perspective.
Rich shares information about his firefighting and paramedic duties.
My primary experience in a national park would be Yosemite. We haven't talked about it yet, but after I came out of the Army, I started working as a firefighter, paramedic, and a lot of that is wildland firefighting out in California. I kind of worked in both realms of firefighting, both in the city, house fires, apartment fires, that kind of. And in the summertime, we'd be out fighting wildland fires.
Rich talks about visiting national parks for rescues.
So I've never been to Yosemite when it was open and operational with thousands of tourists. I've been to Yosemite several times when the park was on fire and it was closed, and we kind of had a free run of the place, but the views were a little obscured for smoke. But I have spent a lot of time in Yosemite. It's beautiful. There is incredible scenery there. I remember a lake called Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, which is where the city of San Francisco gets all of its water. And it's gorgeous and beautiful and really high, in elevation, and really spectacular. It was nice to be there with no tourists, but I'd like to go back when it's not on fire and experience that.
Rich talks about the adventure involved in his career.
I've been on quite a few adventures, but again, with my background in my employment and my jobs, both civilian and military, there was adventure involved. It wasn't as if I got together with a couple of friends and said, hey, let's go climb that mountain for fun. My adventures always seemed to involve either a forest fire, eating up thousands of acres, or a rescue that has to happen. And all of these things tend to take place in beautiful areas. So I get to see the beautiful areas. I get to have the adventure. It's just that I'm working at the time. So the adventure part of it is kind of secondary.
Campfires are frequently banned. Rich shares some fire safety tips.
Somebody who's out experiencing nature, first I would know the regulations, because in most places nowadays they don't allow a campfire. But in places where they do, I would suggest keep it small. You don't need to build a big fire and then sit way back. Build a small fire, sit up close. And then when it's time to move on, make sure your fire's out. Have a water source available. Even when you're toasting your marshmallows or doing whatever you're doing out there, have a water source available, whether it's a big jug of water or a hose from a water source. Have some source of water, so that if, these campfires will tend to throw embers out into the dry grass or brush, and if something gets started, you need to be able to get on that immediately and put that out. And then when it comes time to move on, make sure that your fire is completely out, which means dumping a couple buckets of water on it, stir it up with a stick, and then dump a couple more buckets on it. One thing that I have seen happen is that people will set a recreational fire, like a campfire. It won't be completely out. they'll walk off, and now we've got a wildland fire. And when that happens, they do an investigation, they find out what caused the fire, they find out who was there, and then they will prosecute. And so you can go to prison, or you can get fined hundreds of thousands of dollars, and life is essentially over at that point for you. So what I would suggest is always have water nearby and be super careful with your campfires.
Rich talks about his ATV.
I bought that last fall, and I've used it to plow snow around the property, but I'm really looking forward to getting out and exploring with that thing. For Christmas, my wife got me a couple of guidebooks that have the trails, marked out and all the mileage, so you know when to turn left or right. And there's trails that take you all through the Rockies, and I can't wait to get out and, start exploring. I plan on taking some camping gear and getting out there and notifying people where I'm going and when I'll be back and all the things that we talked about, and getting out there and exploring in that thing. I mean, I think I could probably get places in that I couldn't with any other vehicle. So I'm looking forward to that.
Rich talks about working on the ATV.
Do a bit. I can do basic things, but like I said, I'm kind of new to that. I'm not real familiar with that vehicle, so I don't want to tear into it and get in over my head or get too deep into it. So if I do run into a problem, I'll just trailer it up and take it to the shop. But this kind of part of the fun of it for me is tearing into it and seeing how things work and seeing if I can put it back together. And I haven't had it out and put to a lot of heavy use yet. And when I do, I'm sure I'll break something. So I have a tool bag that I put together with all the tools that I would need to fix most things if I'm out somewhere. And if I can't fix it, I guess we haul it out of the woods and take it to the shop.
Rich shares more about his remote control ATV.
I do. It's sitting right over there. And the reason that I got it was I wanted something for the dogs to chase around. I thought it would be fun, It just happens to look a lot like my ATV, but I'll run it around the property here and the dogs go crazy and it's fun. I have a little stuffed animal that I put on a string that I hook to the back of that thing, and it drags it all over the property and they go crazy. So it's fun.
Rich says there are travel safety tips to consider.
I'm not the expert on that's for sure. There are probably a lot of people who know a lot more than me, but if it was I can maybe share some common sense things like telling people where you're going and when you're going to be back and where you're going, and just like on a hike. But then if you're going to go international, especially these days, I would suggest going on to the State Department's website, and they'll give you the travel advisories. Say if you were going to Mexico or, wherever. Right now, they probably advise against Mexico, but they'll have, different things for you to read about, people for you to contact if things go badly. I would say do that prep work, make sure where you're going is someplace safe, and then also the steps to take if something doesn't go well.
Rich shares the places he'd like to visit.
A few places I'd really love to see. In the U.S., national parks, I think it would be a lot of fun to have to visit as many national parks as I possibly could. And then places like the Canadian Rockies, I would love to go through there one time and see, Banff and some of the other places. And then I've always been kind of fascinated with, in Europe, I would love to see like Austria, Northern Italy, some of the real alpine, beautiful places there, Switzerland maybe. That's what attracts me to Europe. I would enjoy the Normandy region of France just because of my military background and some of my knowledge about what happened there in 1944 and what that means to us. And I'd love to go walk on that ground and see those things.
Rich says there are rescue highlights.
You asked me before about a rescue, and I was talking about Mount Shasta. I will say that there are other things. Maybe some of the highlights would have been in 1997. We had a lot of heavy snowpack in the Sierra, and then we had a lot of rain in the spring, and so we had a massive amount of water come down, and we had huge flooding out in the agricultural areas of the Sacramento Valley. And even in some of the more, urban or developed areas, we had 6 or 8 feet of water. And my National Guard unit was called up, and I spent like 2 weeks out flying, doing rescues. The rescues were primarily in the first like 48, 72 hours, and we were going and picking people up off of rooftops. The way that we did it was, I was a medic, so I would get on the hoist cable. We had a hoist that would drop a cable about 250 feet down that had a seat on the bottom of it, and I'd strap in there, and then they'd lower me down, grab our victim, put them on the seat with me, strap them in, and then we'd hoist them out. They did a lot of that in Hurricane Katrina. You might have seen video of that. But we did a lot of that, rescuing people off of their farmhouses and off their tractors out in their fields. And we did that for about a week and a half. And then, rescues for probably the first couple days. Then after that, it was, a lot of taking people. We flew a lot of scientists around to give them an aerial view of the levee system and where the breaks were and that kind of thing, so that they could take pictures and kind of figure out how to mitigate this thing for the next flood. So we did a lot of that. So, and then otherwise, like I said before, it's a lot of climbers that get hurt or stranded. And we do a lot of cliff face rescue, again with the hoist. They put me on the hoist and lower me down, and then they'd hover in close so I could pick them off the cliff face and strap them in, and off we'd go. And I found that a lot of younger people tend to learn the laws of physics based on video games. So in a video game, if you're skiing, you can jump off this 100-foot freaking thing and do crazy stuff. Well, that doesn't translate well to the real world. And so a lot of times I'd get kids, teenagers, and younger people who were skiing beyond their ability, and they were doing things that they shouldn't, and they end up in a jam. So we fly in, dig them out of the snow, splint their injuries, get them taken care of, hoist them out, and wrap them up in a blanket and get them warm and take them on into the hospital. Did a lot of that. So that kept me pretty busy. It was technically a National Guard job, but I was flying probably 2-3 times a week, doing rescues and then training. All of the cool stuff that we did, we had to train up and stay current in those cool things. So probably for every live rescue that I did, I probably practiced 10 times. So I used to fly a lot. Every day off from work, I'd go up to the base, and we'd get on a helicopter and go do our thing.
Rich talks about the excitement in his career.
I was very fortunate in that my job involved things that I really enjoyed. I was just fortunate that way. My job had me outdoors. I retired about 5 years ago, and now I'm kind of doing other things. But the things that I was involved with put me in places where cool stuff was happening, or interesting things were happening, or there's a certain amount of danger involved that keeps you alert, keeps you engaged. It was very satisfying for me, for my personality types. For my personality type, the jobs that I pursued were all things that really kind of fired up that side of me and kept me very interested. So I would recommend it for anybody who feels that way. Go find something adventurous and do it for a living.
Rich is a hero for his firefighting and medic responsibilities. He earned a living while saving lives. Remember, the greatest treasures are the memories you make along the way.